top 10 most painful torture methods. Between my extensive research and multi-part series on my dark TikTok account, I've learned and studied all of the most well-known and even sparsely used torture methods. In today's video, we'll take into account things such as the length of time, perceived pain, that being physical and mental. And to be clear, today, torture will be referring to the action or practice of inflicting severe pain on someone as a punishment or to force him to do or say something for the pleasure of the person inflicting the pain. Pause.
We're the YouTube employee that's checking over this video to see if it's monetizable worthy. Just so you know, this video is used for only educational purposes and for historical accuracy, not to teach anyone anything bad. Also, this video is not for children.
Back to the video. Number 10. The Swedish drink. The name was created by German troops who were captured by Swedish troops who would be strapped down and forced to swallow large amounts of foul liquids such as human and animal excrement served boiling hot. They were forced to drink until they passed out, and when they awoken, they were forced to keep consuming, usually until death. Number 9. The Brazen Bull. In 560 BC, the ancient Greeks, in a place which modern day is called Sicily, the city was ruled by Phalaris, a wealthy, powerful, and sick man. His court sculptor presented him with a brand new masterpiece, a huge brass bull, conveniently hollowed out and with whistles and pipes, made perfectly to withstand the heat of fire. This new monstrosity would be dubbed the Brazen Bull, after 10 to 20 minutes of the bull being sufficiently heated by fire from underneath. The poor victim would be thrown in. The victim would immediately start thrashing around, as any skin to touch the searing hot brass would blister and melt right off. As the victim screams, the calculated design of the pipes and whistles would create a sound a bull would make. The screams of pain and torture would then tickle Phalaris, and he would begin to laugh uncontrollably. Number 8. Boiling. Though not the most common method of execution, boiling was used in many parts of Asia and Europe. Death by boiling is an extremely painful, and more importantly, extremely lengthy process. A giant cauldron was filled with water, and a hook and pulley system are set up to restrain the victim, along with a method of lowering the victim down, without hurting the executioner. Most popular under King Henry VIII in 1531, some people believed boiling water numbed the skin, and thus the body would feel no pain, but they were sadly mistaken. Fingers and faces have the most nerve endings, so most pain would be felt there. It could take up to 20 minutes boiling, and flesh falling off in immense pain before you would actually be able to die. Since you'll be conscious for most of this, it's impossibly torturous. Number 7. Ling Chi, or most commonly known as death by 1,000 cuts. This was a form of capital punishment, set from the Tang Dynasty to the Qin Dynasty. There were many forms of capital punishment, but this was much different, because it's particularly cruel and slow tactic. This was used all the way up, in some cases, to the 1900s, and because of that, real pictures of this survive. The method goes exactly how it sounds. An executioner would be chosen, and with a blade, razor, or knife, while the victim was tied to a wooden pole, would start cutting, usually starting in the chest, and shredding skin slowly, having to keep up the cutting until the ribs were exposed. Next, the arms and the thighs. They could have large portions of flesh cut out and still have the victim survive. Once the victim ended up passing, they would dismember the victim, to quote, punish them in this life and the next. Most accounts reported the victim would usually die within 15 minutes, but some more brutal cases lasted for hours, usually averaging around 3,000 separate cuts. Though, family with money could pay to have their family members dealt with quickly to avoid suffering. Number 6. White torture. And finally, onto our first type of psychological torture. This will also include isolation torture. These tactics are mainly used by people who want information from the victim, because this method can be used for years on end. The method includes extreme sensory deprivation and isolation. The lights are white and positioned in such a way to not cast any shadows. The clothing is all white. The room is soundproof, along with smooth and padded walls. For meals, the only thing they're allowed to eat is unseasoned rice, to hinder the sense of taste and smell, although it doesn't sound that bad at first. The psychological consequences from this torture is permanent. The people that have lived through this have described the feeling like their head was going to explode at any moment. Also, that the room felt like it was always in motion, and the excruciating head pain was constant. These people have since lost their memory of faces, cannot remember their parents, and can no longer sleep without pills. Number 5. The Blood Eagle. The exact opposite of number 6. The Blood Eagle was quite possibly the most gruesome and horrific method of all the methods on this list, used by none other than the savage Vikings. It was a ritual of vengeance, and there are only 2 existing accounts of it ever being used, though not everyone torturing somebody wants it written in history. The poor victim would be tied up and forced to kneel with their backs to the executioner, who would cut the back flesh open and sever the ribs from the spine. He would then shove the broken ribs into the victim's lungs to form the wings of the blood eagle. Luckily, the torture would only last a few minutes, as death was swift and the rest was left to theatrics. Number 4. Bamboo torture. Due to the length of time, this method could arguably be number 1, due to bamboo being the fastest growing plant in the world, and conveniently growing with a sharp tip. The victim would be tied down over top young bamboo shoots, feeling extremely uncomfortable at first, but after days, the sharp bamboo would pierce the skin, making easy holes in the skin for the victim to bleed and shift their organs. After a week or so, the bamboo would be so deep, it would finally cause death. Another form of this torture involves the victim being tied straight up and the shoot going from their anus and exiting their mouth, out exposed to the elements, while stabbed slowly would have any person begging for the afterlife. Number 3. Gridiron. While creating this list, it was duly apparent this would be on a list somewhere, and would probably make anyone's list. The victim would be basted in oil and strapped down on a bed of iron. A fire would be lit underneath them, and the oil would make sure even distribution of burning flesh, just to make sure the most pain would be endured, and in some cases, the fire would get so out of hand, it would engulf the victim. Number 2. Rat torture. When torture methods come up, this one is usually brought up because of its creativity and pain being equally high. Rats would be starved for days, while the victim would lay strapped down, and caged rats would be sat on the belly of the victim. To give them a bit of a push, a fire would be set above them, causing the rats to burrow to the softest exit. Sadly, that was the victim's belly. This method was used from the 17th century up into the 1960s, and in some very, very rare cases, into the 1990s. A sick method used not long before we were walking this earth. It's crazy to think, while our parents were around, this was still happening. Number 1, and usually rated the worst method of all time, from the length of time and the pain dealt, all the way to the embarrassing nature of it, Scaphism, an ancient torture method that surprisingly killed people with just milk and honey. This method was reserved for the murderers and the worst that society had to offer. Usually, the victim was tied down into a boat, with a barrel set on top. Their arms, legs, and face would be exposed. Occasionally, arms and legs would be sat inside the boat. The victim was force-fed large amounts of milk and honey, more than any human should ever eat. After the victim has eaten, the exposed body parts would be lathered in the milk and honey. It would attract animals and insects to bite and attack the victim. If being slowly eaten alive by bugs wasn't enough, the milk and honey diet would leave them sick and dehydrated, causing what some would call explosive diarrhea. They were fed more and more milk and honey every day, and sometimes small meals, just to keep them surviving. And survive they did. Weeks, months at a time, these victims were tortured. Being trapped inside of a barrel, the acidic nature of human excrement would eat at their flesh, all the while attracting maggots. The victims would be in this so long, they would usually just die of infection. And there you have it, you curious sicko. The most painful and horrific torture methods. And somehow, you made it all the way to the end of the list. You and your strong stomach, take this historic information and use it for good, not evil. If you had to choose one of these methods for yourself, which one would it be? Honestly, myself, I don't want to die. And as much torturing as I have to endure, I'll just do that. So in my case, I would probably pick white torture. And I know I'd probably end up with a bunch of psychological problems, but I'd rather end up with tons of psychological problems than to die in a horrific way, or for my family to know I died in a horrific way. As for the worst method, for myself, not counting a list of what everyone's fears are, Gridiron and the Brazen Bull, because I don't want to be heated up to die. The moment you start lathering me in oil, I gotta go. Now when TikTok voted, the two they voted for the worst are bamboo torture and elephant torture, which didn't even make the list. A quick rundown, elephant torture is pretty much trampling. They let the elephants loose on your body, and soon enough, they will crush your head, which results in instant death, obviously. If you enjoyed watching and you want to know more weird things, don't forget to subscribe. And if you liked the video, hit the like to help a small creator. Before this video ends, if you would like to, here are my social medias. You can follow me on these things, and I'll be active. Pinky promise. Also, special thank you to allthat'sinteresting.com. I've been all over that website, looking up so much information on all this weird stuff, and they help me out a bunch with a bunch of my videos. So if you ever get curious and I don't have any videos posted around, you know you can always visit that site, and they'll have some amazing, interesting content for you guys. This is The Real Goodbye. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.